You may be aware that I have begun recitation of the Vimalakirti Sutra within Mahayana Buddhism, one of the Prajnaparamita Sutras or Wisdom Sutras within that great vehicle tradition. I was actually inspired to begin this unabridged recitation based on a request from Shaun, my friend in Hong Kong, who will take this recitation, the audio portion of it, and correlate it with Chinese and English subtitles, creating this video as a sort of collage of 4 other videos, portions of them, by folks who can explain the Vimalakirti Sutra better than I can, and whose presentations may give you a deeper sense of appreciation for the sutra. For myself, I've recited the first 2 chapters, and I do consider it to be a wonderful sutra. It certainly portrays in an elaborated way the nature of the bodhisattva role and the fundamental theme of sunyata or emptiness. And while I think we have to perhaps moderate the impact of some of the negativity toward the earlier form of Buddhism, what we now refer to as Theravadan, or what I refer to as Theravadan, that there are great lessons within this sutra. You kind of have to immerse yourself in it, I think, and try to experience it with parts of the mind that are not as left brain / rational or whatever, and just kind of let it permeate into your being, and recognize that there is no separate being, that we are all interconnected. The other thing I noted in these first couple chapters is the Buddha's emphasis on the pure land of the Buddhas, the pure land that the Buddhas create, and the importance of those lands in the context of skillful means. I'll just close my little preamble to this collage of video excerpts with a quote from chapter 1, where the Buddha says, "Bodhisattvas acquire the Buddha lands according to what country sentient beings need to enter into Buddha wisdom. They acquire the Buddha lands according to what country sentient beings need to generate the roots for becoming bodhisattvas. Why is this? Because bodhisattvas' acquisition of the pure countries, or pure lands, is entirely for the benefit of sentient beings. So, Amida creates his pure land for us, for me, to help me enter into Buddha wisdom, to help me to generate the roots for becoming a bodhisattva. Even the existence, quote unquote, of the Buddha himself is a skillful means. And as I think it's pointed out in one of these videos, that he himself would not exist, quote unquote, were it not for the need of human beings to have this kind of teaching in order to facilitate the process of movement toward Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Namo Mita Butch. Namo Mita Butch. Namo Mita Butch.
And so a little background information about the sutra. Okay. The Vimalakirti Nadesha Sutra, which originated in the Sanskrit term, means the following. If you look on the slides, you will see Vimalakirti obviously means the name of the layman. Okay? In Chinese, 维摩诘居士, okay? The very, very famous layman. And Nadesha, meaning instruction or device, followed by sutra, which means threads or truths that have been linked together. And together we have, in English, a sutra spoken by Vimalakirti. Or someone also translates it into the teaching of Vimalakirti. Okay, and the very famous Chinese text called 维摩诘所说经. Okay, I believe those who read Chinese texts would not find this sutra a strange topic. Okay, as a lot of famous expressions in Chinese actually originated from this particular text. Okay, let me give you an example. Have you heard of 天女散花? Okay, it's not just from the Dunhuang text where you have a lot of ladies wearing tights, wrap themselves around ribbons and sprinkle flowers. Okay, it's actually in the Buddha land that there are celestial beings who do this as a celebration of the Buddha's teaching. Okay, and there's another one that says 随其心净则国土净. Okay, if your mind is pure, your land would just be as pure. Okay, we talk about these different expressions all the time, and perhaps tonight we'll also get a chance to talk about why and what it actually means in this text. Okay. And this title, being the Vimalakirti Nadesha Sutra, might vary a little from the traditional text which you have seen, which is usually that spoken by the Buddha. Right? Starting from, thus I have heard, 如是我闻, 一时佛在哪里哪里, 在做什么做什么. At one time, the Buddha was in a place doing this and speaking that. Okay, but the Vimalakirti Nadesha Sutra this time has a different protagonist or a different speaker, that is the Vimalakirti. Therefore, Buddha's teachings presented in a person other than the Buddha himself, but recorded as a sutra, is called a Buddha Vachana, which literally means the Buddha's words. Okay? But it's not the actual words of the historical Buddha, but having someone else to present his teachings in a different style. And nor is it preached in a manner entirely by the Buddha. Okay. And what's more about this text is that the Chinese version is written in a vernacular prose, which is a very popular literature that talks about the Prajnaparamita of the Mahayana tradition, which is presented in an extremely lively and inventive depiction of religious dialogue. It's very dramatic, it's very, very humorous, it's full of insight, and it also contains frequent eruptions of the miraculous. Okay, so it looks like a script, a playwright about this very extraordinary man who has a little fun with the so-called enlightened disciples of the Buddha. Okay, breaking down their conceptual realizations to help them achieve one very important thing. And what is that thing? I shall mention this later. Okay, just a little more background information on the text. Okay. We know that the existing 3 Chinese texts are as followed. The first version, translated by Ziqian, a famous monk, called 佛说维摩诘经. And the second, which is the most popular, translated by Kumarajuva, 维摩诘所说经. Okay, when you read the Chinese, you'll see that it's written very smoothly and elegantly, along with Master Shen Zhao, who added explanations and annotations about this version. And later on, it came Master Xuan Zhang's version called 说无垢称经. Okay. Why? Because Vimalakirti itself actually means the name of purity, or the name of untaintedness. And so that is how we come about with the names 维摩诘经 or 说无垢称经. And then as this text gets passed into the West, it becomes translated into the English either directly from the Tibetan or from the Chinese. Okay. And some of the most famous versions includes the 5 you see in front of you. The earliest being the one translated in 1972, Sutra spoken by Vimalakirti by Charles Luc. And then going into 1976, the very famous French Buddhist scholar by the name of Lamotte, who translated directly from the Sanskrit into the French. And then by Sarah Bowen Webb, who then translated the French into the English. Okay. Once again, another very well translated text. In 1997, there is a version by Burton Watson from Columbia University, and which has been praised as one of the smoothest philosophical presentations of the Vimalakirti Sutra. And then in 2000, the scholar by the name of Robert Thurman translated the Holy Teaching of Vimalakirti, a Mahayana scripture, once again really fully focusing on the philosophical aspects of the sutra. And so that is why you can also tell by the additional name that is being given in the title itself, a Mahayana scripture. Okay, although the actual title itself doesn't say so. And then in 2004, we have a version by John McCrae, known to be the American scholar who pretty much brought the teachings of Zen to introduce the teachings of Zen to America. And so he, representing the Numata Center, translated along with the Sutra of Queen Srimala of the Lion's Roar and the Vimalakirti Sutra, is the latest translation, which is also the version you're holding in your hand. Okay, I hope you'll have a copy of the handout, which includes quotes from the sutras, which we will be reading as we go along the talk. And now a little bit on the objectives of this teaching. Okay, we are listening to the teachings of Vimalakirti for a few reasons. First of all, to expound the Dharma door to inconceivable liberation. In Chinese, 不可思议解脱法门, which was attained by Vimalakirti. And thus, this text is sometimes also known as the Sutra on Inconceivable Liberation. And in the sutra, other than some parts being taught by the Buddha himself, it includes what we call a dialogue, or pretty much a debate, between the layman Vimalakirti and the Bodhisattva Manjusri on the importance of turning away from Hinayana and realizing the Mahayana path. It's like a reminder for you, self-enlightened ones, turn away from Hinayana and face the greater vehicle to benefit the better ones. And so in this, it tells us how lay Buddhists are encouraged to practice in their path down Buddhahood. And to talk about this from the philosophical aspect, it's also a reconciliation of dichotomies, where the dialogue between these laymen and Manjusri Bodhisattva, to the two greatest minds, actually becomes an attempt to put an end between separation to put an end to the separation between men and women, sacred and secular, as well as samsara and nirvana. In other words, they want to open the Dharma door to inconceivable liberation beyond what? Perceiving and conceiving. And when we read about this text, especially for monastics, it's also a chance for us to address the misunderstandings of Buddhism and Buddhist teachings amongst ourselves, even if some of us could be highly realized disciples of Bodhisattvas. And by us, I mean you sitting there and everyone present. Okay. And just a bit more, when we look at the objectives of the teaching, okay, the purpose of this text is also to turn back the wheel to the original message. Okay, we need to look very, very straightforwardly to the words and their meaning. Okay, so we start to turn from empty words to concrete implementation, cultivating with fun. And we turn from the superficial ritual to what we call genuine practice. Okay, it's no longer just discussions or high-end debates. We want to know that this can be applied to our daily life. Last but not least, it's an emphasis on not just following the Buddha. 我们不是只有跟着拜佛求佛. We're not just praying to Buddha. We actually want to realize Buddhahood. Okay, so quite a noble and ambitious text presented in the perspective of a lay Buddhist. Okay, and so hopefully this text will be a suitable chosen topic for all of you, being the lay bodhisattvas, who may not necessarily choose the path of becoming a monastic, but while still holding a household life, can you still travel down this road?
The Vimalakirti belongs to a body of Mahayana sutras known as the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Perhaps the most famous one is the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, of which many of people here, I imagine, know it in its sort of truncated form as the Heart Sutra, because quite a lot of schools of Mahayana Buddhism do chant the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and so on. I'm sure quite a few of you have come across various translations. And like the Prajnaparamita Sutras and many of the other Mahayana sutras, including the Lotus, this particular sutra was written down round about in the 200-year period, 100 years before the Common Era and the the end of the 1st century of our era. And the themes that it deals with, as Desmond also pointed out, are those common old chestnuts of the Mahayana. Shunyata, emptiness, or radical emptiness, as Eric Cheetham liked to call it, and it certainly is radical. The realization of the interdependence of all things as well. There's also the teaching of the middle way in its most profound sense, which of course again is that shunyata, and brings together both shunyata and also dependent origination. And for those perhaps who are looking a little alarmed at these terms like shunyata and dependent origination, perhaps just to give an example of this. The whole idea in Buddhism that nothing stands alone, and therefore there can be no separate I. The teaching of anatta, known as the lion's roar, passes all the way through the teachings, both early and the later Mahayana development too. And it relies on its source, this real sense that nothing can arise by itself. Everything is interrelated. And this goes deeper and deeper. This is the teaching of the middle way, and at its deepest it becomes that teaching of shunyata. That sense that if A arises, B arises. If A doesn't arise, B doesn't arise. And so in this sense, everything is interconnected together. Unfortunately, in the way that we see both ourselves and other people, we take personal possession of things, whether it's myself, or my ideas and my opinions in particular, my belongings, etc., are quite often completely disregarding that rule, that law, inherent law of all things being interdependent, and therefore complete and total ownership of anything is impossible. In other words, in a universe where everything is truly impermanent, nothing can stand separate and nothing can be truly owned. And this is a theme also that runs very much through the Vimalakirti. The style of the sutra as well, it's very playful. As I said, it's funny, which is a quality that's quite rare in religious scripture generally, unfortunately. But it's here. And the nice thing about it is that as you're reading it, there's this constant sense that it's sort of winking at you, the reader, as you actually read it. Because the characters who are in it, well, obviously the Buddha's in it, and the character Vimalakirti's in it, and we'll come to him shortly. But there's also, if you're familiar with your Buddhism and your the personalities in Buddhism, people like Mahakasyapa and Shariputra and Moggallana, these were the great disciples. And of course, in the later teachings, along come the bodhisattvas, such as Manjushri, bodhisattva of wisdom, and many of the other bodhisattvas as well, some better known than others, but all of them considered great in their own right. And yet the way that the sutra deals with them is really quite shocking for people who are deeply steeped in Buddhism, who venerate not only the Buddha himself, but his teachings and all those who came before, and it almost seems to mock. And we have to remember, and it is made clear at various points throughout, that one of the most important themes here is that of skillful means. And that, of course, it's not just what people do, but even people's even these beings' very own existence is a skillful means. The Buddha himself is a skillful means. After all, if it wasn't for the existence of delusion, then there would be nothing for Buddhas to do. So even Buddhas can't stand alone and apart. They are required, that delusion is a requirement for Buddhas to arise. And therefore, some of the characters, even though they may play the fool, actually we have to understand that they play the fool not because they are fools, but because they, out of their infinite compassion, are willing to play the fools in order to make the point of Dharma that they wish to make. And so in this way, it's a useful way to approach the sutra, very much with that knowing eye.
The piece itself, the sutra has very breathtaking, abstract statements about inconceivability. And the entire sutra, its miracles, its reversals, its amazing transformations, is all about saying the world you can imagine is not the world. This is the first sutra that's not narrated by or about a monk, somebody who's been ordained and has taken Buddhist vows, but quite the opposite. Vimalakirti is a businessman. Buddha tells his disciples, his main disciples, Shariputra and Manjushri, that there's this businessman and he's ill, and they should go visit him and offer him their condolences, and they would learn a lot. So that annoys them immediately. So they show up to this businessman's house, and they're a little too big to fit in the front door. So he has to reconfigure his house in order that Buddha's disciples can set foot in it. Finally, Shariputra breaks the ice by saying, okay, as Vimalakirti is lying there on his sickbed, okay, if you're so holy, how come you're sick all the time? And this text deals with sickness and with healing in astonishing and very surprising ways. I've been obsessed with this text for more than 20 years and have always wanted to stage it.